What's up, booktube? It's Leah Cooper, and today I'm here to talk to you about everything I read in the first month of 2021, aka everything I read in January, with the stats. And at the end, I will talk briefly about a couple of the things I'm going to read next month. Just a quick disclaimer, this channel is not monetized by me, so feel free to run ad blocker on it, and fuck YouTube. Alright, now, let's talk about some books. So something I have mentioned in my last several videos is that I'm currently going back to school. I'm in a creative writing, literature analysis class, so I do a lot of reading for class. I do track that, all of my class readings, which are a lot of excerpts from books or PDF handouts, short essay type things, or articles. I do track all of those pages read and the things that I'm reading in my spreadsheet. Those pages go towards my total pages for the month. However, I think going forward, I'm not going to talk about the articles I read. I just don't think there's any interest in it. It's not like I can link to most of them. Maybe if there's like an exceptional article that I can link to, I'll talk about it. But for the most part, I just don't think anyone cares, you know? So we're just not going to waste any time on that. I am going to talk about any full-length books or novellas that I read for class, because this month is mostly made up of nonfiction I read for class that was in the form of a full-length book. That stuff I think might be of interest to some people watching. The other thing I'm going to try to do is that, despite the fact that I've been reading less the last couple of months, the length of these videos has crept up and up because I have no control over how long I talk over things. I just ramble a lot, so I'm going to try to make these more concise. There will be timestamps down below in the description box / YouTube's little chapter segment thing, so you can skip ahead if you just want to hear about a specific book. I've been using that feature in the last couple of videos. I really love it. I hope it's helpful for someone watching. Okay, so we'll go over the stats first. I'm also going to touch base each month on how I'm doing with the goals I set for myself. So one of the goals I set for myself is to read 52 books, like on Goodreads, and that averages out to like 4-ish books a month, you know, a book a week. This month I finished 5 books, so I'm slightly ahead of schedule, on track. In addition to that, I read 10 things for class, so that's 10 entries on my spreadsheet, and I had 2 DNFs. I read a total of 1,761 pages for an average of 57 pages per day of the things that I completed. Another one of my goals was to read more from my personal physically owned / Kindle owned TBR, which I did not do well on this month. According to my stats, I only read one thing that I owned. It was actually something I had bought at the end of December / early January to read for class. So it like went on the TBR and then immediately got read. So I didn't make any progress on like reading more of the books I own. And then my final goal is I have a TBR. I have an annual TBR. It is 15 books I want to read this year. Because that's 15 books, that means I need to read slightly more than 1 book a month to stay on track with that, so I'm not at the end of the year needing to read like 5 books in December off that TBR. The book I pulled out of my TBR jar from that list last month was Children of the Jedi by Barbara Hambly. As you can see, I'm 20 pages into this book. I did not read this last month, so I didn't get any progress made on that challenge. So my goals are pretty hit and miss this month, but let's talk about the actual things I did read. The first thing I finished in January was a library book, and that was The Silvered Serpents by Roshani Chokshi. This is the sequel to The Gilded Wolves. It came out last year? Yeah, end of last year, I believe, and I quite enjoyed The Gilded Wolves. I think I gave it probably a higher rating last year than it really deserved, but I was entertained by it. It was a fun, fast read, and I think it was basically doing what it said it was going to do on the tin. And so for that, I did give it a pretty solid like 4-star rating, even though probably technically it's more of like a 3-star book if we're talking like quality craft-wise. But, you know, I enjoyed it, and so I was really looking forward to The Silver Serpents, which is the sequel. Unfortunately, I gave this like a 2.5 star. I did not enjoy this. I was very disappointed by it. So this series takes place in like 19th century France-ish for the most part. It's an alternative kind of history world with a fantasy element. There are various different like houses in this magical network, and they all have different magic and Babel fragments and historical artifacts and gilded objects, which are magical objects. People have different gilding magic affinities, and our protagonists are a group of young adults who basically steal powerful and magical objects. And their leader is a very fucked up character at this point, because of something that happened at the very end of the Gilded Wolves. And we're dealing with all of like the emotional aftermath of the Gilded Wolves. But the problem was for me that I didn't like the sudden weird emotional shift that happened at the end of the Gilded Wolves. That actually is the thing about that book I didn't like. I didn't like what happened with Severin's character right at the end of the book, and what happened with him and Lila right at the end of that book. I'm trying not to give any spoilers, but I really, really hated that. And I haven't read The Gilded Wolves in like a year, and I didn't go back and reread it, but picking up The Silvered Serpents felt very disjointed from where that book ended. Like, I remembered something happening at the end of that book that like didn't quite connect with where we were at the beginning of The Silver Serpents. So I felt just like I felt on the wrong foot through a lot of this book, and that's just because of the time it took for the next book to come out, you know? But also, this is because it's an ensemble cast, we have multiple different POVs in the book, and I felt like we obviously had to have Severin's character because he is really the principal character. But his chapters were like, the whole point is that he's like so emotionally cut off, but because he was like so emotionally cut off and so emotionally distraught and so trying to suppress all of his emotions, he didn't feel like a real person anymore. He just felt like a caricature. So his chapters felt unnecessary, and they really dragged. Like, I almost wonder if it would have been better if we just hadn't had his point of view in this book and we'd gotten someone else's point of view, so that he would have just felt alienated from us, which is like the point, because I felt like we didn't actually get anything out of his point of view. He was just, waxing on about woe is me the whole time he had a point of view chapter. That was really fucking frustrating and just really turned me off from the whole story, which is a shame because I didn't have any problem with his point of view, his POV, his chapters in like the first book. I thought he was pretty interesting. It felt like a very disjointed book that was kind of just serving the author's plot. I don't know. And the plot just kind of felt mushy and all over the place. So yeah, 2.5 stars. I was really disappointed. I don't know if I'm gonna read the third book, because probably everyone's gonna fucking love The Silvered Serpents, but I didn't think it was a very well written sequel. So there you go. The next thing I read was actually going to be the DNF, my first DNF of the year, and that is Making Habits, Breaking Habits by Jeremy Dean. This is nonfiction, not exactly a self-help book. It's more of just like a book about habit making. Dean takes a lot of the scientific literature, the studies that have been done about habits and tangential topics related to habit building, and he basically tries to condense it down into layman's terms. He's trying to take like a lot of different studies and kind of group them together and present them as a body of information for the layperson. So this is very simply written, which is fine. I think that's good. I didn't want something super technical or super scientific. I'm reading this because my independent writing project, which is a portion of my class this quarter, is to work on developing a habit, specifically a writing habit. And so I was reading this as like a non-writing book that's related to my topic. Unfortunately, this book is not super well written. It's like functional. it conveys the information, but Dean does not infuse it with any kind of character. Reading it, I felt like I was reading basically an undergrad student's essay on the topic. So it conveys information in a very factual and fundamentally understandable way, but it doesn't enhance the information or convey the information in a way that's has voice or character or is interesting. He does not really try to engage the reader. He does use like analogies and stuff, but he doesn't present them in any way that's like interesting or funny. There's no humor in this book. Not that that's a requirement, but I do think that if you're doing a very scientific topic, you're talking about studies, and you're trying to present them in ways that are easy for people to understand, that are like digestible for the like someone who just wants to educate themselves on a topic, I think you bringing something to the table in the form of style is necessary for it to be a good book, because otherwise it's reading someone's essay that they had to turn in by Friday and had to be 20 pages, and like fucking no one wants to read that. So I would recommend this, frankly. I think there are some tidbits of information. I think the first 4 chapters are the best chapters because they have like the bulk of the information in the rest of the book is there. And you can stop after 50 pages and you don't have to read the whole 200 pages, which is just mind-fuckingly boring. And it's not even boring in like a technical way, because it's not technically written. So it's not that you're getting a ton of details either. So like, cause like that I think is the trade-off. If you're reading something that's really boring, but it's like really technical and it's giving you a lot of information, that is a trade-off. Maybe you put up with it being a little bit boring to get more information out of it. But if it's just boring and also just fundamentally fairly surface level, then oof, no, that is no. So yeah, I DNF that. First DNF of the year. It took me a really long time to come to the conclusion that I needed to DNF it instead of trying to like strong like ox my way through it. But I did. That's my other goal for this year, is to DNF earlier and to DNF more often when I can tell a book is going to be like a 2.5, maybe 3-star book, and it's just not gonna, I'm not enjoying it, or it's like I'm avoiding reading because I'm supposed to be reading that. So pat on my back for doing it. Next thing I finished reading was another nonfiction book. I was also reading this for my independent writing project for class, and that was Bird by Bird by Anne Lamott. This is a book for writing instructions for writers. It's also a bit of a memoir, strongly influenced by the writing class Lamott used to teach. I don't think she does it anymore. This is an old book and like very, very, very popular in the books by writers for writers about writing genre, right? So I think probably a lot of people have read this. This is the second time I've read it. The first time I read it when I was a kid, and I decided to pick it as one of my bibliography books for my project because I wanted to revisit it and I wanted to see what she had to say. I don't agree with everything she's saying in this. She's writing from a point of view that what she and her students are writing is like contemporary family drama type work. She's writing it from the perspective of everyone's writing the kind of books that Anne Lamott writes, which I definitely do not agree with, but I think she has some good nuggets about like getting writing and making it a habit and writing it a small piece at a time. I think her chapter on Polaroids is what it's called, and it's writing just trying to capture us, like you have this whole story and it's really hard to get yourself to start when you have like this whole big thing. So instead break it down into really tiny pieces that just fit into a teeny tiny little picture frame. Write that section and then move to the next teeny tiny little picture frame. I think that's actually some very good advice. I think the introduction is one of the strongest pieces in here. It's just kind of talking about how she got into writing. It's talking about writing advice her father gave her. Her father was a novelist. It sounds like a kind of trashy literary novelist, though I don't know anything about him personally. And so I think there are still some like pieces of truth in here. It's not a waste of time to read. So the next thing I read for class was another book by writers about writing for writers genre, and that was 2K to 10K, How to Write Faster, something by Rachel Aaron. Pop up a little picture. This is a very short 100-page book based off of a blog post she wrote like 8 or 9 years ago. And it's just her talking about how she went from writing like 2,000 words a day to like 10,000 words a day, and kind of the model of how she built up to doing that really, really consistently. She has this triangle of what you need to be able to do that. And it's basically, you need to have enthusiasm for what you are writing. You need to know what you are writing ahead of time. So you need to plan plan in fairly good detail what needs to happen in that writing session. And then you need to know when you work most efficiently and try to work in those time periods. And when you kind of get a handle on those three things, you can start to write a lot faster because you are writing more efficiently with less like downtime. I think this is actually like a really interesting book. If you're interested in being a genre fiction career writer, I think this is very valuable, especially if you are looking to go full time and not waste your time, because I think as writers we can spend a lot of time wasted. And the last thing I read for class, and again this was like short novella length, it was again about 100 pages, that was Regarding the Pain of Others by Susan Sontag. I read this specifically for class, not my independent writing project. And this is Sontag's essay on war photography and kind of its place, its use, its impact on society. This is the first time I've ever read Sontag. I did not know what to expect. I know she's a very well-respected essayist, and because she is so well-respected, I was very nervous to read this. I didn't realize we were going to have to read the entire thing, so I read this in 2 days, and I was shocked because I was really worried it was going to take me a long time, be really, really dense, but it's actually incredibly readable. It's very kind of well-organized and thought out. You can follow what Sontag is talking about, even though I read it as in an ebook format. It didn't have any pictures in it. I don't know if any version of it has pictures in it, because she's talking about pictures, right? She's talking about photography. So even though the photography itself wasn't in the book, she writes about it so coherently and so succinctly that it's like you can imagine the things that she is talking about, even though the pictures themselves are not in the book. That's why we were reading it, because we were doing a unit on how to talk about physical things, how to write about physical objects or pictures and stuff like that. So I think this is really interesting. I think the topic is very timely, talking about, violent imagery, war photography. I think this is can be related to like what we are experiencing with like images of violence happening around the country, around in other countries, etc. I think it's still extremely relevant and interesting. So I would recommend this, actually. If the topic is at all interesting, sounds interesting or informative or like useful or relevant to you. And then the last thing I read this month was for myself, and that was an audiobook. It was Passage by Lois McMaster-Bujold. It's the third book in the Sharing Knife series, and like I said, I listened to this on audiobook, and I gave this like 4.5 stars. I'm double checking. Yeah, 4.5 stars. I liked this more than the second book. Not that the second book was bad. I really like the second book too. But I think the series, I just love this series so much. It takes place in another secondary world fantasy by Bujold with kind of two factions. You've got farmers and you've got lake walkers. Lake walkers are kind of light magic nomads who patrol the whole region and fight malices, which are these like evil magical amalgamations that kind of pop out of the ground and consume the life force out of people and molt and get stronger and spread blight, suck the life out of everything, including the land. And this book is kind of about a lake walker who falls in love with a farmer and marries her, even though that's like taboo. And he basically is not expelled exactly, but kind of like unofficially expelled from his people. And so in this third book, that's happened, and he's decided to go on basically a walkabout, and he wants to see more and interact more with farmers, because he is concerned with the fact that lake walkers and farmers are so separate that farmers don't have any knowledge about really malices, and that ignorance can be deadly. Like in the second book, we see a farmer town where hundreds of people are killed by a malice before the local lake walkers even realize the malice has popped up, because the farmers don't know what to look for to realize there is a malice literally in their town. And they are so hateful and distrusting of the lake walkers, they don't communicate with them. And so Dag is really concerned about this lack of communication between the two groups. And so he's kind of going, he travels down the river with his wife on a river barge, kind of trying to figure out how he fits into this puzzle and how he can bridge the two groups. And so Passage was really, really great. It was such a good kind of traveling story, which a traveling story is not necessarily my favorite thing, but I think this was really, really well done. This also has very, very, very strong found family elements to it, which I love, which have continued on a little bit in the fourth book, which I'm also listening to currently. And I can't recommend this series enough. I think it's really, really great. If you want to read some more Lois McMaster Bejeweled fantasy, or you want to find a place to start with her, I think this is a very good place to start. I mean, Cursed Chalion is also a very good place to start. This series is like self-contained, and I think very interesting and fun. It has a lot of romance, especially like the first book has a lot of romance towards the end of it. That relationship continues to be a central aspect of the books, though I think they're a little bit more focused on like social and family issues in the later ones. So there you go. And then the last thing I wanted to talk about was my last DNF of the month, and that was another thing I was reading for myself. It was Kingdom of the Wicked by, I'm going to have to look at her name because I can never pronounce it, Carrie Maniscalco. She's the lady who wrote Stalking Jack the Ripper, that series. Kingdom of the Wicked was her 2020 YA fantasy release. I never read Stalking Jack the Ripper. I thought it sounded ridiculous and not in a fun way. So I didn't touch that series. But I saw my library got a copy of this, and so I went ahead and checked it out, just to have something kind of light, fluffy, and easy YA fantasy to read, right? I gave this a fair shot. It's about a 375-page book. I read to page 183 before I DNF'd it. I don't have anything like super objectionable to say about the first half, and it's fairly easy to read, but it's not good. And that's kind of where I landed. I was telling my partner about it, and I was like, it's not bad. It's not the worst thing I've read. It doesn't make me want to avoid reading because I need to read it. Like, it's not putting me in like a mini slump, but it's not good. I can't say it's good, but I also can't say it's bad. I'm just so indifferent to it because it's not great at all. And in kind of the process of talking about it and how there was just nothing about it I was really enjoying, I kind of realized this is the sort of book I need to just DNF, because previously I definitely would have just kept myself reading it to be able to say that I finished it, to be able to put it on my spreadsheet as read, to be able to mark it as read on Goodreads and count it towards my Goodreads goal. But like, honestly, it was probably going to be a 2.5-star read, depending on how the ending went. You know, it could go up to a 3 or down to a 2. But that's as good as it was gonna be. Like, it wasn't gonna be. There was nothing about it, I think, that could get it better to such a degree it would be like a 4-star book suddenly, if that makes sense. And those kind of books, I'm trying to be a lot more just brutally honest with like myself and force myself to just cut my losses. Like, I don't have to finish everything I start, especially if it's just kind of eh. And that's how I was feeling about it. I just felt eh. It had some really laughably bad descriptions of the, bad boy love interest that I was just like, eye roll. But it also wasn't so bad it was fun either. I DNF that. I'm sure lots of other people will find it entertaining. Props to them. Not my thing. Probably not an author who's I'm going to try again. I just don't think she's for me. She also, just some of the way she constructs her sentences. She writes her sentences backwards, and it's a thing I notice in YA fantasy. And it's like frustrating because it's a thing where you would think they'd fix it in editing. There's like almost this passive voice thing that happens in sentences where you put a lot of well, this almost happened. I was barely doing this. Like these weird wishy-washy adverbs. I had almost, this might almost happen if I wasn't barely doing this because of that. And it's like, just say, I was doing this and this thing happened, or this thing almost happened. This thing would happen if I did this. Like there's way of being like very concrete, writing a concrete sentence and writing a non-committal backward sentence. I know I'm not really making any kind of sense because I don't have an example. I don't have an example in front of me. But it's just a style thing that I think you should probably edit and fix in edits that doesn't always get fixed. So, yeah, not an author for me. That's the last thing I tried to read. Now on to brief discussion of TBR next month. So I don't really know what I'm going to be reading month to month because most of my reading is for school. I think something like 750 of the pages I read this month were like for class, and about 1,000 were for fun. The only thing I can say for certain I'm probably going to be reading at least parts of is Steering the Craft by Ursula K. Le Guin. I'm going to be trying to read this or parts of this for my independent writing project. Don't know if I'll finish it. And then I do need to read this because this was my pick from my TBR jar last month for 15 books to read in 2021. Gotta get this read. I started it today. It's my active book that I'm reading. And then I picked another book out of my TBR jar for this month, and that was Mossflower by Brian Jakes. This is a reread of middle grade fantasy series I loved as a kid. It's this triumphant prequel to Redwall. Also, I am still reading Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell. I'm on page 221. Basically, I try to read 1 to 2 pages of this per day, and eventually I'll finish it, or so I tell myself. It might take a couple of years, but I'll get there. And then I have 2 books on hold at the library. I'm going to try to pick them up tomorrow. The first one is Burning Roses by Elsa Huang. This is a Red Riding Hood retelling. I think it's a Red Riding Hood retelling mixed with a myth from maybe Korean folklore that I don't know the name of. I saw the author talking about this book on her Twitter, and how she described it immediately caught my interest. So I'm going to be trying to read this. I think this is technically a Tor.com novella because it's only 150 pages. So I've got that. I'll definitely get to that next month. And then I'm also going to pick up a copy of Lady Hotspur by Tessa Gratton. This is Gratton's 2019 book. She wrote The Queens of Innislear, which I read 2 years ago, I guess now. Yeah, I read it during a power outage. That's the only reason I got through it. That book was monstrous. And this book is pretty big too. This is like a 600-page book as well. Queens of Innislear was a secondary world epic fantasy King Lear retelling. Lady Hotspur is a Henry V retelling, because it's a retelling of Prince Hal. That's Henry V, right? Because Henry IV was his father, the one who did all the conquering, and then he's the prince after all the conquering's been done. Right? I think I'm getting my Shakespeare right. So I didn't love the ending of The Queens of Innislear. I'm actually like really kind of frustrated by that book. But I will say that in the 2 years since I read it, that book continues to haunt me. I think about it a lot. I think about different things in it a lot. I think about the way it was written a lot. And so even though I didn't love it, I find it compelling. I find it a book that has stuck with me. And so I think there is something about Tessa Gratton that I could potentially really, really love if I got the right book from her. So yeah, I'm going to go ahead and give this one a try, see what I think about it. Oh, we'll see. It'll be a bit of a challenge since it's such a long book. But that's also kind of, I think, something that I find compelling about it, that it's such a like deep, immersive, long, rich story. At least The Queens of Innislear was, so I'm assuming Lady Hotspur will be too. I haven't seen it. I saw a lot of people talking about this before it came out, but I don't think I've seen anyone talk about having read it. But I'm still very curious about this. So those are kind of the 5-ish things I'm hoping to read personally this month. I'm also listening to the 4th book in the Sharing Knife series, which is called Horizon, and I'm about a third of the way through that and loving it. Really, really, really loving it. It's the last like official book. I think it's like a quintet kind of thing, but there's some new books Bujold's writing that takes place after the original series. But anyways, I'm really, really loving Horizon. So yeah, that's where we're at. Based on the time it took me to record this, I don't actually know if I'm going to hit my goal of being succinct or short in my videos, but for what it was worth, I tried. Let me know if you've read any of these books or if you're thinking about picking any of them up down below. How are your reading goals for the new year going? Have you stayed on track? Have you like thrown half your goals out the window? Let me know. And I will see you guys in my next video. Like I said, I'm probably just going to be doing wrap-ups for now while I'm in school because I don't have time to do anything else. But we'll see. Thanks so much for watching. Thanks so much for sticking around with my super erratic, long-winded posting schedule. And I'll see you guys later. Bye.